I still remember the screeching tires, the smell of burning rubber, and the gut-wrenching crunch of metal. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't even supposed to be there. That morning, Ethan had begged me to handle the meeting with his client, some last-minute emergency with an important contract. He said he trusted me, that I had the brains to smooth it over better than anyone else could. Maybe I should have been flattered, but instead, I felt resentful. Wasn't this his responsibility? I never reached the meeting. The accident was a blur. The other driver ran a red light, and before I could react, I was spinning, the world outside the windshield a kaleidoscope of chaos. When I woke up, everything hurt. My arm was in a sling, my head throbbed, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. I was in the hospital. For the first 2 days, Ethan was attentive. He held my hand, brought me flowers, even shed a tear or two. I thought, maybe, this could be a turning point for us. But then his visits became less frequent. His excuses were plausible at first, work meetings, tight deadlines, but I started to sense a distance, a shift in his demeanor. It was the 3rd day when I noticed the lipstick smudge on his collar. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. I mean, Ethan wasn't perfect, but he wasn't that kind of man. Right? Still, something gnawed at me. Something that wouldn't let me ignore the details piling up like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. He started to spend hours on his phone, texting someone with a faint, smug smile. When I asked him who it was, he mumbled something about work. "Which client needs you smiling like that?" I asked one evening. He didn't answer. I decided to investigate. With one hand clutching the four-pole for balance, I waited until Ethan left my room. It was easy to guess his phone's password, our anniversary. I felt sick as I scrolled through the messages. Her name was Emma, and the texts left no room for misinterpretation. "Last night was incredible," she'd written. "So was the night before," Ethan replied. I felt my world crack open, a chasm of betrayal threatening to swallow me whole. My husband, the man who promised to stand by me in sickness and in health, was cheating on me while I lay broken in a hospital bed. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Each word etched itself into my brain, a dagger twisting deeper with every line. It wasn't just one night or even one mistake. This was an affair, deliberate and ongoing. I thought I might scream, but instead, I put the phone back where I found it, carefully aligning it exactly as Ethan had left it. The air in the hospital room felt suffocating. I could hear the faint beeping of machines monitoring my vitals, a cruel reminder of my fragility. How ironic that the very man I relied on during my recovery was the one driving me closer to despair. When Ethan returned, he walked in with his typical composed demeanor, holding a coffee cup and a bouquet of wilted flowers he must have grabbed from the hospital gift shop. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice unnaturally bright. "Fine," I replied, my voice like glass, fragile, about to shatter. I wanted to confront him right then and there, to throw his phone at him and demand an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear of the truth, fear of what would come next. Or maybe it was the cruel part of me that wanted to see how far he would take his lies. The next day, I asked him to grab something from the cafeteria just so I could check his phone again. This time, I scrolled deeper into the texts, finding photos. One of them was a selfie of Ethan and Emma at a bar. His arm was draped over her shoulder, and she was kissing his cheek. The timestamp told me it had been taken 2 nights ago, while I was lying unconscious in this bed. But it wasn't just the photos or the messages. It was how easily Ethan compartmentalized his life. He had walked into my hospital room that same evening, kissed my forehead, and told me he loved me. And I had believed him. A week later, I was discharged, but the doctor insisted on at least another month of rest before I could return to work or drive. Ethan offered to set me up in our guest room, where I could recover without moving too much. At first, I thought it was a considerate gesture. But when I woke up late one night to find him gone, I realized the truth. He wasn't making space for me, he was creating space for himself. Ethan claimed he had to work late again, but I wasn't buying it. I decided to call his bluff. The next evening, when he said he had a business dinner, I pretended to be too exhausted to argue. As soon as he left, I called a rideshare service. I hadn't healed enough to be doing this. I was in pain with every step, but I couldn't sit in that house one more second, letting him make a fool of me. The text I'd read gave me a clue where to look. A trendy new wine bar downtown, the same one from the photo. The ride there was a blur of adrenaline and fury. When I arrived, I spotted Ethan almost immediately. He was sitting at a small, dimly lit table in the corner, leaning toward Emma, laughing at something she'd said. Her hand rested on his arm, the kind of intimate touch reserved for lovers. Something inside me snapped. I stormed across the bar, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the music. "Ethan!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the chatter. Heads turned, and the room seemed to freeze. Ethan whipped around, his expression a mixture of shock and panic. Emma's hand recoiled as if I'd slapped it. "Hannah," he stammered. "Don't you dare say my name like that," I hissed. "How long has this been going on?" "Hannah, it's not what it looks like. Don't insult my intelligence." I slammed my hand on the table and Emma flinched. "You've been sneaking around with her while I was in the hospital, while I couldn't even walk." The bar staff began to edge closer, sensing a scene. "Hannah, please," Ethan said, lowering his voice and glancing around. "We can talk about this at home." I laughed bitterly. "At home? You mean the house where I've been lying alone, thinking you cared about me, while you've been here with her?" Emma opened her mouth, but I silenced her with a glare. "Don't even think about it," I snapped. Ethan stood, reaching for my arm. "Let's leave, Hannah." I yanked my arm away, my voice rising. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Ethan. Not anymore." I turned to Emma, who looked mortified. "Did he tell you I was recovering from a car accident? That I could barely sit up in bed? Or does he keep that part quiet?" Emma flushed and looked away. "That's what I thought." My voice broke, but I refused to cry in front of them. The bar manager approached, gently asking us to leave. I didn't argue. I stormed out, my vision blurred with anger and tears. Ethan followed me, begging me to stop, but I ignored him. I got into the rideshare I'd called and left him standing on the curb, shouting my name. Back home, the silence in the house was deafening. I sat on the couch, my hands trembling as the adrenaline wore off. The confrontation at the bar replayed in my mind, every word, every glare. It was like a movie I couldn't stop watching. But the raw anger that had fueled me earlier was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of betrayal. Ethan came home an hour later. He stepped inside cautiously, as though he were a trespasser in his own home. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't even look at him. "Hannah," he began, his voice low, placating. "Please, let me explain." I laughed bitterly, staring at the floor. "Explain? You think there's an explanation for what I saw tonight? For what I've been reading on your phone for days?" His face paled. "You went through my phone? That's what you're upset about?" I snapped, finally meeting his gaze. "That I found out your dirty little secret?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "It wasn't like that," he said. "I mean, it wasn't serious. Emma and it just happened. I've been under a lot of stress." "Oh, spare me," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You cheated on me because you wanted to, Ethan. Don't act like it's some tragic accident that just happened. You chose this." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression desperate. "I still love you, Hannah. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it." I stood, cutting him off. "Fix this?" I said, my voice trembling with fury. "How do you fix the fact that I trusted you, that I stood by you through everything, only for you to humiliate me like this? Do you even understand what you've done?" He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "No, Ethan, you don't get to say another word. You're going to pack a bag and you're going to leave. Tonight." "Hannah, wait." "No," I said firmly. "I mean it. You don't get to stay here and pretend everything's fine. It's not fine. You destroyed us, Ethan. And you can't fix it with empty words." For a moment, he didn't move, as though he thought I might change my mind. But when I crossed my arms and glared at him, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, he trudged upstairs. I heard him moving around, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the zipper of a suitcase. When he came back down, he hesitated at the door. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice breaking. I didn't reply. I couldn't. After the door closed behind him, I let out a shaky breath and sank back onto the couch. For the first time since the accident, I felt truly alone. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I filed for divorce immediately, determined not to let Ethan weasel his way back into my life. My family rallied around me, offering support and love, but even their kindness couldn't fill the hollow ache inside me. One afternoon, my sister Mia came over with groceries and a bottle of wine. "You don't have to go through this alone, you know," she said, sitting beside me on the couch. "I know," I said, forcing a smile. "But it's hard to let people in. I feel stupid. Like I should have seen this coming." Mia shook her head. "You're not stupid, Hannah. He's the one who messed up. Don't let his choices make you doubt yourself." I nodded, but her words didn't ease the guilt that lingered. Months passed and I began to rebuild. Physical therapy helped me recover from my injuries, while therapy sessions helped me confront the emotional scars Ethan had left behind. I threw myself into my work, taking on a full-time position at the boutique where I'd been part-time for years. And then one day, while sorting through a shipment of new arrivals, I found myself smiling. Really smiling. It wasn't much, a small moment of joy, but it felt significant. By the time my divorce was finalized, I was stronger than I'd ever been. Ethan tried to reach out a few times, leaving voicemail messages about how much he missed me, but I never responded. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset, I realized something. Ethan's betrayal had shattered me, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, still fighting for a life I deserved. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. Months turned into a year, and with each passing day, the wounds Ethan had left behind began to scar over. I wasn't fully healed, how could I be? But I was learning how to move forward. The boutique became my sanctuary, a place where I could pour my energy into something tangible. Helping customers find joy in little things, a dress that fit perfectly, a pair of earrings that made them shine, reminded me that small moments could carry big meaning. But Ethan's shadow still lingered. His texts dwindled but never stopped. Birthdays, anniversaries, even random Thursday afternoons, I'd get a message. "I miss you, Hannah. Can we talk? I made a mistake. Please give me another chance. You're still my wife in my heart, even if the papers say otherwise." I ignored them all, but every message reopened the wound just a little. I knew I couldn't truly move on until I confronted him one last time. One evening, after a long day at the boutique, I found myself dialing his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice tinged with hope. "Hannah? Yes, it's me." I paused, studying my breath. "We need to talk. But this isn't about getting back together. I need closure." He agreed to meet at a coffee shop near my apartment. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked thinner, the lines on his face deeper. Guilt, perhaps. Or regret. "Hannah," he said, standing awkwardly as I approached. "Ethan," I replied, sitting down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, weighed down by everything unsaid. "You look good," he offered, his voice tentative. "Thanks," I said flatly. "Let's not pretend this is a casual chat, Ethan. I'm here because I need to understand something." He nodded, leaning forward. "I'll answer anything. I owe you that much." "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Why did you do it? Was I not enough? Did you stop loving me?" His face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. "It wasn't about you, Hannah. It was never about you. You are amazing. I was the problem." I crossed my arms. "That's a nice excuse, Ethan. Care to elaborate?" He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "I felt small. Like I was failing you. You were so strong, even after the accident, and I couldn't handle it. Emma was easy. She didn't expect anything from me. With her, I didn't feel like a failure. His words hit like a punch to the gut, but they also clarified everything. You didn't feel like a failure with her, I repeated, shaking my head. So instead, you turned me into one. Do you know how much you broke me, Ethan? While I was lying in that hospital bed, thinking you were my rock, you were off with her. Do you even understand what that did to me? Tears welled in his eyes, but I didn't stop. You made me question everything, my worth, my strength, my ability to trust. And now, you want to sit here and tell me it wasn't about me? No, Ethan, it was about you. You were weak, and instead of fixing yourself, you broke us. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't offer excuses. He just nodded, his voice barely a whisper. You're right. I was weak. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I leaned back, letting his words sink in. Good, I said finally. You should. After that meeting, I felt lighter, as if a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been lifted. Ethan didn't text me again, and for that, I was grateful. In time, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my heart. I started volunteering at a local rehabilitation center, helping others recover from injuries similar to mine. It was there that I met Caleb, a physical therapist with a warm smile and a patience that rivaled anyone I'd ever known. At first, I was cautious, wary of letting anyone in again. But Caleb wasn't like Ethan. He didn't need to dominate the room or prove his worth. He simply showed up, kind, consistent, and genuine. Months turned into a year, and our connection grew. Caleb taught me how to trust again, but more importantly, he showed me that love didn't have to hurt. One evening, as we sat on the couch in my apartment, sharing a bottle of wine, Caleb turned to me, his expression serious. You've been through so much, Hannah, he said. But you're stronger because of it. And I'm grateful I get to be part of your story. For the first time in a long while, I felt my heart swell with hope. Looking back, Ethan's betrayal was a turning point, a painful catalyst that forced me to confront not only his flaws, but my own fears and insecurities. It taught me to value myself, to demand more from life, and to never settle for less than I deserved. And as I stood on the balcony that evening, Caleb's arms wrapped around me, I realized something profound. Betrayal may have broken me, but it didn't define me. I was whole again. And this time, I was choosing love, not out of desperation, but out of strength.